Mark my words, Premier League games will be played on American soil. Here's why. No relegations or promotions, a total overhaul of the football pyramids, salary caps, a draft, dare I say, kiss cam, happening at Stamford Bridge. Okay, none of these things are probably going to happen, but the Americanization of English football has already started. And I'll come on to that in a minute because it's slow and insidious, but it is happening. And the next major event we'll see in relation to the American takeover is a competitive Premier League match happening in the United States. I mean, it already nearly happened. Anyone remember back in 2008, and the biggest story by far of that whole year was the 39th game. I mean, I think something also happened with like the global financial markets or something, but the 39th game far outweighed that in terms of importance. And here's what happened. As most of you know, the Premier League consists of 20 teams and each team plays 38 games per season. Well, as the name suggests, the Premier League put forward a proposal to play a 39th game. But this time, the fixtures would be held at different venues globally. One in Sydney, one in Beijing, one in Dubai, and potentially one on both the west and east coast of America. It was believed that each Premier League team could generate an extra 5 million or so from playing these extra fixtures, which at the time was actually quite significant. Whereas now, it wouldn't even cover the average agent fee for a middle-of-the-road Premier League transfer. However, the backlash it received from various proponents of English football was heavy. The Football Supporters Federation, as they were then known, was perhaps the most vocal, claiming that the proposal was purely about money and greed, even going so far as to label it with a nice pithy name. For me, this doesn't feel as clever as I think they think it did. For one, it could only be communicated in written form. And two, it reads more like GAM £39 rather than how they intended. But I'm going off on a tangent. Anyway, even Sepp Blatter didn't like the idea, although despite what he outwardly said, I've no doubt there would have probably been a corrupt reason behind his thinking. Allegedly. I've got to say allegedly for reasons. So, the Game 39 proposal was proposed and then buried very quickly. But whilst it was buried, it was never dead and buried. In fact, when it was buried, it was more buried as in how you bury seeds. And we all know what seeds do given time and the right conditions. Nice little seed analogy for you there. And I promise it works. Here's why. Since 2005, the number of Americans investing in or outright owning Premier League clubs has risen sharply. In fact, as of this season, almost half of the clubs in the Premier League are American-owned. You have the Cronkies at Arsenal, V Sports at Villa, Bill Foley at Bournemouth, Todd Bowley at Chelsea, John Textor at Palace, Khan at Fulham, John Henry's FSG at Liverpool, the Glazers at Man United, and Game Changer 20 at newly promoted Ipswich. Even Man City are 18% American-owned. And then you have Everton, who have been flirting like a socially awkward teenager, that means poorly, with American investment group 777 Partners, and more recently the Friedkin Group, who had to actually pull out of negotiations due to issues with club debt owed to 777 Partners. But the point is, future decisions of over half the clubs in the wealthiest and most watched league in the world are in the hands of American owners. And in a minute, I'll explain why that is so vitally important. But first, earlier I jokingly mentioned about Kiss Cam and other Americanizations of English football. And I said that it had already started. Here's what it looks like. Remember the Chelsea incident at Stamford Bridge in a game against Fulham, where a group of actors in the crowd did some sort of odd performance, all in the name of promoting a film which was being made by a production house that was owned by Chelsea owner Todd Bowley. Now this sort of thing would and does seem to go down alright in the States, but we're a nuanced, stuck in our ways lot over here, and it doesn't seem to quite hit the right notes. But what about Fulham, owned by Jacksonville Jaguars owner Shahid Khan? Now he had plans costing upwards of $200 million, whereby the stadium would undergo refurbishment and extension, and restaurants, swimming pools, hotels would all be built, just like he has done with the Jaguars. On the face of it, that sounds great. But fans are not stupid, and they know that when investment like that is discussed, it means one thing: rising costs that are passed on to them. And don't even get me started on pre-game shows, the musical acts, the pomp and pageantry. Just get on with the football. Look, I'm not saying any or all of these things are inherently bad. In fact, a very strong argument can be made that the American influence on English and, to a wider extent, European football is actually a very good thing. Clubs, especially in the Premier League, have been taken from the business of staging matches to being, in some cases, all-out entertainment and retail giants. The trouble is that football in the UK, rightly or wrongly, is still seen as a working class game, accessible to all. But with the commercialisation, which is not solely down to American owners, by the way, a lot of fans are being priced out of being able to watch the teams they love. And it's not even just happening at an elite level. But let's get back to why half the clubs in the Premier League being owned by American investors is such a vitally important point. So, Richard Masters, the chief exec of the Premier League, has stressed that the Premier League is owned by the 20 clubs that play in it in any given season. Not by him as a CEO, not by any other high-ranking execs, and definitely not by the big 6 clubs. Or is it 8 now? Or is it 4? Tottenham? Big? The Premier League is merely a governing body, a facilitator, a rule enforcer, but it does not make decisions in a silo. Any rule changes, calendar tweaks, major ideas are all put to a vote. And who votes? Yep, the 20 clubs in the Premier League. And for any of those ideas or rule changes to pass, at least 14 clubs need to agree. But what happens when 14 of those clubs are owned by investors in one country? Now, I know that we're not at that point yet, but trust me, we will be. I mean, just look at the numbers. Over a third of the clubs in the English professional football pyramid are owned by Americans. And that number will increase. When you consider the cost of an expansion franchise in the MLS costing about $500 million compared to the ease in which someone like Bill Foley could purchase Bournemouth for $147 million. Or former Disney exec Bob Eisner purchasing former Premier League club Portsmouth for around $6 million, just as they were promoted back up to League One. Since then, they've progressed back up to the Championship and will, of course, be wanting to get to the Premier League. Now, that's a hell of an investment for Bob Eisner if they manage to do that. $6 million, considering how much clubs make once they get to the Premier League. But back to the point, what happens when 14 out of the 20 Premier League clubs are owned by investors from, in this case, America? Well, that brings us back to the 39th game. Remember, back in 2008, half of the Premier League clubs were owned by foreign investors, and they voted for the 39th game to happen. And even when it didn't, Richard Scudamore, who was the CEO of the Premier League at the time, said that whilst it isn't happening now, he was adamant that it would happen at some point in the future. Now, we've already seen a number of Premier League clubs heading to the States for their pre-season tours. We had the Summer Series happen in 2023, and whilst it didn't happen this year due to the Euros, Copa America, the Olympics, it is likely to take place again. Is this just a primer to ready the fans for the fact that games taking place in the States is going to be more commonplace? Of course, the Premier League clubs don't hold all the sway in terms of what happens with their clubs, their league, and the fixtures. Those pesky reprobates, alleged, over at FIFA also have some control, but that control might be dwindling. And to explain why, we need to take a swift detour to Barcelona. Gotta do the In August 2018, Relevant Sports, a sports promotion company owned by Miami Dolphins billionaire owner Stephen Ross, announced that it planned to host a regular La Liga season game between Barcelona and Girona in Miami. Now, FIFA took a moment from swimming in their gold coins like Scrooge McDuck, I'm assuming that's what they do, and they said, no. And the ruling council immediately adopted a policy that emphasised the sporting principle that official league matches must be played within the territory of the respective member association. Barcelona then quickly chickened out and withdrew its commitment to play in Florida. Relevant then sued the governing bodies, claiming violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and tortious interference. To cut a long story short, the lawsuit was dismissed, but then it was revived, and this is where it gets really interesting. FIFA were named as a defendant in that case, and to get the case resolved, they agreed to something that will potentially pave the way for the Premier League and other European leagues to play competitive matches in America. So what did they agree to? Well, essentially they agreed to set up a 10 to 15 person working group to discuss and determine whether regular season games can be played outside of their own countries. Now this is massive. So massive, in fact, that La Liga are looking to hold regular season games in the States as early as the 2025-26 season. And La Liga boss Javier Tebas has said something really important when it comes to the future of the Premier League. He said official matches in the US will strengthen our position in the North American market, which is the second for La Liga after Spain. So why is that important when it comes to the Premier League? Because of the last point he made about capturing the American market. Yes, of course, there's room for more than one league to have market share, but there is only room for one league to be the major player. So do the Premier League and its constituent clubs really want to miss out on the opportunity to corner the American market? I mean, considering the amount of money that can be made, probably not. So, not only is La Liga planning on playing competitive matches in the States, FIFA also seem to be on that course to allow teams to play competitive matches outside of their countries. Premier League is well on its way to having the majority of its teams owned or heavily influenced by American investors, which points us in the direction of games being played in the States. And also, it would seem that a senior executive at NBC Sports, which first acquired the Premier League broadcasting rights in 2013, has said that there will be a renewed push to host season fixtures in the US. On the back of that, Richard Masters, who, as I mentioned earlier, is the CEO of the Premier League, has once again stated that the door looks ajar when it comes to Premier League matches being held in the States. Even London's mayor, Sadiq Khan, no idea why he's getting involved, has been heavily criticised recently for claiming that it is inevitable that Premier League matches will be held abroad. Now, obviously, this will not be a simple path, and the likes of the Football Supporters Association, who hold considerable sway, will put up a valiant fight. But money talks, and money combined with voting power talks even louder. So I can't tell you when, but I believe all the signs are pointing to regular season Premier League games being held in the States.